The forest stood wide and silent as the sun slowly climbed above the trees and light touched the ground in soft patches. A man named Tom walked carefully between rocks and roots while holding the small hand of his son Leo. Tom's clothes were worn and his shoes were old, but his steps were firm and his eyes stayed forward as if he was following a path only he could see. Leo looked around with quiet wonder and a little fear because everything felt big and unknown. Tom stopped near a small open space where tall trees circled the land like quiet guards. He set down the bag on his shoulder and took a deep breath. This place was far from towns and people and noise. This place was chosen not by comfort, but by need. Tom knew they could not go back, and he also knew they must go forward even if forward meant wilderness. Leo sat on a fallen log and hugged his knees. He trusted his father, but his small heart still carried questions. Tom knelt in front of him and smiled gently. He told Leo that this land would keep them safe for now and that they would build something together. Leo nodded because his father's calm voice always made fear smaller. Only months before they had lived in a small house near the road where cars passed and lights stayed on at night. Life had been simple but heavy. After Leo's mother passed away, everything became harder. Tom worked long hours at different jobs, but money disappeared faster than it came. Bills stacked up and help never arrived. One cold morning, they were told to leave and no one asked where they would go. Tom had felt shame that day, but he did not let it show. He held Leo's hand and walked away from the only home his son remembered. That night he made a choice. He would not beg or wait. He would build something with his own hands, even if the world had turned away. Now standing in the forest, Tom opened the bag and checked the few things inside. There was an old axe, a small hammer, some nails, rope, a pan, a blanket, and 2 shirts. It did not look like much, but Tom believed beginnings never looked impressive. Leo watched closely as if these simple tools were something important. They spent the first night under the open sky. The forest made sounds that Leo had never heard before, and he stayed close to his father. Tom wrapped the blanket around them both and spoke quietly about tomorrow. He told Leo they would build walls and a roof and a fireplace. Leo listened until sleep found him. Tom stayed awake longer, watching shadows move and telling himself that fear would not win. Morning arrived with soft light and bird calls. Tom stood up stiff and sore but ready. He studied the land carefully. He noticed a slight rise in the ground where water did not collect. He saw a stream not far away and fallen trees that could be used. He nodded to himself and said this was the spot. Tom showed Leo how to collect small branches and keep them together. Leo took pride in helping and moved with purpose. Tom swung the axe slowly at first, then stronger as his body remembered old skills. Each strike echoed through the trees and each piece of wood felt like progress. By evening the land looked different. A small clearing had formed and logs were placed in rough lines. It was not a house yet, but it was proof of effort. Tom cooked a simple meal and they ate quietly. Leo leaned against his father and smiled because he felt useful and safe. The days that followed were hard. Tom worked until his hands cracked and his muscles burned. Sometimes a log slipped or a wall leaned the wrong way. Tom would pause, breathe, and try again. He never raised his voice or showed anger. Leo watched closely, learning patience more than skill. Food was never enough. Tom made sure Leo ate first and told him stories to distract from hunger. At night, Tom lay awake thinking about strength and time and whether he could finish what he started. Each morning, he stood up anyway. Slowly, a frame rose from the ground. Logs leaned together and rope held them tight. The shelter looked weak, but it stood. When wind passed through, it shook but did not fall. Tom pressed his hand against the wall and felt pride grow inside him. One afternoon, rain fell hard and fast. Water slipped through gaps and soaked the ground. Leo's eyes filled with worry, and he asked if the shelter would break. Tom placed his hand on Leo's head and told him it would hold and that tomorrow they would fix what was wrong. That promise gave Leo comfort, and it gave Tom strength. Tom began filling gaps with packed earth and layered wood. He raised the floor using flat logs to keep them dry. Each change made the place warmer and safer. Leo helped where he could and learned how small actions created big results. One day Tom slipped while lifting a heavy log and fell to the ground. Pain spread through his side and his breath caught. Leo rushed to him and held his arm. Tom told him he was fine even though pain said otherwise. Leo stayed close, and that quiet support mattered more than rest. Weeks passed and the shelter no longer looked temporary. Smoke rose from a small fireplace and the walls stood firm. Tom stood back one morning and looked at what they had made. His body was tired and his clothes were worn, but his heart felt full. Leo smiled and said they'd build it together. Tom nodded and felt something stronger than relief. He felt hope. He did not know what the future held, but he knew this creation was only the start of something greater. The shelter stood quietly among the trees as morning light touched its wooden walls and thin smoke rose from the small fire inside. Tom woke before the sun, as he always did, and listened to the forest breathing around them. The place still felt rough and unfinished, but it was standing, and that alone felt like a victory. Leo slept near the fire wrapped in the blanket with a peaceful face that gave Tom strength. Tom stepped outside and stretched his sore body while looking at the sky. Clouds moved slowly and the air felt calm. He knew work would never end, but he also knew every day brought the shelter closer to becoming a true home. He whispered a promise to himself that Leo would grow up safe no matter how hard the road became. When Leo woke, Tom handed him a small piece of bread saved from the night before. Leo smiled and ate slowly as if he understood how important each bite was. After eating, Leo gathered wood while Tom checked the walls and roof. Some parts needed strengthening and others needed sealing before colder days arrived. Tom decided to build a proper door because the open entrance let wind and rain enter too easily. He searched the forest and found flat pieces of wood near an old fallen tree. He cut and shaped them carefully while Leo watched and handed him rope. By evening, a simple door hung in place and closed with a quiet sound that felt comforting. Days passed and Tom focused on improving small things that mattered. He built shelves from thin wood to keep food and tools dry. He shaped a small bench where Leo could sit and read the old book they carried. He cleared stones from the ground and made the floor smoother for sleeping. Each task felt small, but together they changed everything. Leo began to explore farther each day while staying close enough to call his father. He learned the sound of the stream and the places where berries grew. He learned which paths were easy to walk and which were not. Tom watched him carefully and taught him respect for the land rather than fear. One afternoon, Leo returned excited and told Tom he saw smoke in the distance. Tom felt his chest tighten because people meant questions and judgment. He climbed a small hill and saw thin smoke rising far away. It was distant and steady, which meant someone else lived out there. Tom felt unsure, but decided to stay alert rather than hide. He believed honesty was stronger than fear. He told Leo to stay close, and they returned to work while keeping watch. A few days later, footsteps approached their shelter slowly. Tom stepped outside holding nothing but standing tall. An older man appeared with gray hair and kind eyes. His clothes were simple and worn like Tom's. The man spoke calmly and said he lived deeper in the woods and noticed the smoke. He said his name was Sam. Tom listened carefully and introduced himself and Leo. Sam looked around at the shelter and nodded with respect. Sam said it was rare to see someone build something with such care alone. He said he once built his own cabin years ago after losing his family. His words carried weight and understanding. Tom felt a quiet relief and invited Sam to sit. They shared food and stories by the fire. Sam showed Tom better ways to seal the roof and strengthen corners. He taught Leo how to set simple traps and respect animals without harm. Over time, Sam became a quiet presence who visited now and then. He never judged or asked questions that hurt. He only helped when needed. Tom felt less alone knowing someone nearby understood his struggle. With Sam's advice, Tom began building a second room for storage. He planned carefully and reused every piece of wood he could find. Leo helped measure using steps and sticks and laughed when things did not match perfectly. Winter signs slowly appeared in the forest. The air grew colder and leaves changed color. Tom worked harder knowing time mattered. He built thicker walls and a better fireplace that held heat longer. Leo collected dry wood daily and stacked it neatly. One evening, heavy rain and wind arrived together. The shelter shook but stayed firm. Water stayed outside and the fire burned steady. Leo looked around with wide eyes and smiled because the shelter worked. Tom felt a deep, quiet pride that filled his chest. That night, Tom realized the shelter was more than wood and earth. It was proof that broken lives could still create strong things. It was proof that love and effort could shape safety from nothing. Days later, Sam returned with seeds saved from his own land. He said spring would come again and that growing food meant freedom. Tom accepted with gratitude and planned a small garden near the stream. As weeks passed, the shelter stood strong against cold and rain. It looked simple from the outside, but inside it held warmth and life. Leo laughed more and slept better. Tom felt tired, but hopeful in a way he had not felt for years. One morning, Tom stepped outside and looked at the home they had built. He knew the world beyond the forest still existed, but he also knew this place had changed him. He was no longer just surviving. He was creating a future with his own hands. Winter arrived slowly but firmly as cold air settled over the forest and frost covered the ground each morning. Tom woke before dawn and added wood to the fire while Leo slept curled beside him. The shelter held warmth better than Tom expected, and that alone felt like a reward for every hard day. He listened to the wind outside and felt grateful that it stayed beyond the walls they built. Tom stepped outside and saw the forest changed by cold light and quiet stillness. Trees stood bare and strong, and the stream moved slower but steady. He checked the wood stack and smiled because it was still full enough to last. Planning ahead had saved them, and that thought gave him calm confidence. Leo woke and helped prepare a simple meal while wearing a jacket patched many times. He moved with ease now and no longer feared the sounds of the forest. This place had become normal to him, and that made Tom proud and sad at the same time. During the day, Tom worked on improving details that once felt impossible. He carved wooden pegs to replace loose rope and built a stronger frame around the roof. He used clay from the stream bank to seal cracks and smooth walls. Each improvement made the shelter quieter, warmer, and safer. Leo spent time reading and drawing shapes in the dirt. He asked Tom questions about how things worked and why certain choices mattered. Tom answered patiently and explained that building was not just about wood but about thinking ahead. Leo listened carefully and stored those lessons deep inside. Sam visited often during winter, bringing advice and sometimes small gifts like dried food or tools he no longer needed. He never stayed long, but his presence reminded Tom that kindness still existed beyond struggle. Sam looked at the shelter each time with growing respect and said little because words were not needed. One day, Sam suggested building a lookout platform near the trees to watch weather and animals. Tom liked the idea and spent days preparing strong supports. He worked slowly and safely because he knew mistakes in cold weather were costly. Leo helped by passing tools and holding wood steady. When the platform was finished, it stood firm above the ground and gave a wide view of the land. From there, Tom could see the stream, the forest edge, and even distant hills. It felt like control over space that once felt overwhelming. Leo climbed up with wide eyes and laughed with excitement. As winter deepened, Tom noticed how well the shelter handled harsh nights. Snow piled against the walls but never entered. The fireplace worked perfectly and smoke rose cleanly. Tom realized he had built something better than he imagined. It was not just a shelter, but a real home shaped by thought and care. Food remained simple but steady. They used dried supplies and what little the land offered. Tom taught Leo patience and balance rather than fear of lack. Leo learned that survival was not about having more, but using wisely. One evening during heavy snow, a distant sound reached Tom's ears. It was a voice carried by wind. Tom climbed the platform and saw a figure struggling along a forest path. Without hesitation, Tom grabbed a torch and guided the stranger towards safety. The stranger was a young man, cold, tired, and lost after leaving a nearby road. Tom welcomed him inside without questions. Leo offered warmth and food with a shy smile. The stranger stared at the shelter in disbelief and asked how it was built so deep in the woods. Tom answered simply that it was built slowly with care and purpose. The stranger rested and left the next morning thankful and changed. Word of the shelter began to spread quietly among those who passed through the land. More travelers appeared over time, sometimes just looking, sometimes asking for rest. Tom never turned anyone away who showed respect. Each visitor left with a story of the home in the wilderness built by a man with nothing but effort. Spring signs finally appeared as snow melted and soil softened. Tom and Leo planted seeds Sam had given them. They prepared the land carefully and protected it from animals. Watching green shoots rise from the ground felt like magic and reward combined. Leo laughed when the first leaves appeared and said the land was helping them now. Tom nodded and felt something deep settle inside him. This place was no longer a hiding spot. It was a living space shaped by trust and patience. As days warmed, the shelter stood proud against green growth. The lookout platform, the garden, and the strong walls made the place look intentional and planned. Travelers stopped just to see it and left amazed. Tom watched Leo grow stronger and more confident each day. He realized the true creation was not the structure, but the life they built within it. He stood outside one evening and felt the quiet power of what they achieved. People would soon come, not out of curiosity but admiration. Tom did not seek praise, but he understood now that his work spoke louder than words. What started as survival had become something that inspired others. Spring fully arrived and the forest transformed into a place filled with color, movement, and gentle sound. Green leaves covered the trees and the air carried warmth that felt new and welcoming. Tom stood outside the shelter early each morning and watched sunlight move across the land he once feared. Now it felt familiar, like an old friend that had finally opened its arms. The garden near the stream began to grow strong and healthy. Small plants pushed through the soil, and Leo checked them every day with excitement and care. Tom showed him how to water gently and protect the roots. Each plant felt like proof that the future could grow from patience. Travelers continued to appear from time to time. Some were hikers who heard stories about a remarkable home deep in the woods. Others were people searching for quiet or guidance. They all reacted the same way when they saw the shelter. Silence followed by wide eyes and slow steps filled with respect. The structure stood firm and beautiful in its own simple way. Thick walls blended with the forest, and the roof followed the slope of the land as if it belonged there. The lookout platform gave the home a thoughtful shape rather than a rough one. People did not see a poor man hiding. They saw skill, care, and purpose. Tom welcomed visitors calmly and shared food when he could. He never spoke about hardship unless asked. When people asked how he built it, he answered honestly. He said it was built one day at a time with no shortcuts. Those words stayed with visitors long after they left. Sam visited more often now and smiled each time he arrived. He said the shelter had become a quiet landmark. He said people spoke of it with admiration rather than curiosity. Tom listened, but did not feel pride in the way others expected. He felt peace because he knew his son was safe. Leo began helping travelers by showing them paths and explaining the garden. He spoke with confidence and kindness learned from watching his father. People listened carefully to him and treated him with respect. Tom watched these moments quietly and realized how strong his son had become. One afternoon, a group of builders arrived carrying notebooks and tools. They asked permission to study the shelter and learn from it. They said its design matched the land better than modern buildings. Tom felt surprised but allowed them to look. They measured walls, studied airflow, and asked questions about choices Tom made without formal training. Tom answered simply and truthfully. He said he listened to the land and learned from mistakes. The builders thanked him and said his work showed wisdom beyond books. When they left, they promised to share his ideas with others. As weeks passed, more people came not to stay but to understand. Some brought supplies as gifts. Others brought stories of how the shelter inspired them to build or rebuild their own lives. Tom accepted kindness, but never asked for more. Leo once asked why people cared so much about their home. Tom knelt beside him and said it was because it was built with honesty. He said people could feel when something was made with love rather than profit. Leo nodded and hugged his father tightly. One evening, Tom stood alone on the lookout platform as the sun set behind distant hills. He remembered the first night in the forest filled with fear and doubt. He compared it to the present filled with calm and purpose. The difference felt unreal but true. He realized the creation that left people speechless was not the shelter alone. It was the story behind it. A man with no money, no help, and no promise of success chose to build instead of give up. That choice echoed through every wall and beam. Leo joined him on the platform and leaned against his side. He said this place felt like home more than anywhere else. Tom felt emotion rise in his chest, but kept his voice steady. He told Leo that home was built wherever people cared for each other. As night settled, the shelter glowed softly with firelight. Crickets sang and the forest rested. Tom knew life would continue to bring challenges, but he no longer feared them. He had learned that strength came from effort and love rather than comfort. People would continue to speak of the house in the wilderness. Some would call it a wonder. Others would call it inspiration. Tom would simply call it home. The man who arrived with nothing had built more than walls. He built stability, hope, and a future for his child. And that creation would continue to speak long after words faded.